Hi, I'm Martin Lester Hochheiser. My Hebrew name is Meir Levish, and that's the tradition in among Jewish people to name people after relatives who have passed away. My first name is from my father's grandfather, my great-grandfather, whose name was Meyer. That's why, and they anglicized it to Martin, and then the Hebrew name is Meyer. Lester was unusual because my mother had a dream about some man named Lester. It really didn't fit. They call me Marty, and that's generally my nickname. The only other time I really had a different nickname, when I was 19, I was out in California, and I had a beard, and I was working in an auto factory. Everyone there knew me by the name of Fuzzy. In fact, I was living by myself. I was living in this like a apartment hotel where I had a room, paid a weekly rate, and there was a little old Jewish lady there who would never come anywhere near me because I had the beard. And then at one point I shaved the beard. Then she decided it was okay, she could talk to me.
You're married?
Yes, I'm married for 41 years to my wife, Marcia. I have one son, Scott, who's 37. And
where do you live, Marty?
I live in East Islip in a little house.
And you've been there for how many years?
I moved into there in 1968. I'm rare because I'm a native Long Islander. I was born in Babylon in 1935. What was unusual, I was born in the middle of a blizzard. No cars could get in or out of town, so I wasn't born at Southside Hospital, which was where I would have been born, but I was delivered in the apartment that my family lived in at that time. I like to say that was one of the good things that this doctor did, because during World War II, he was a Nazi sympathizer and used to make remarks, and some Navy people beat the hell out of him one day.
Talk about your son a little bit. Tell us something.
Okay. My son is a good-looking young man who was kind of late finding himself, but he had a pretty good job doing technical support for a pharmaceutical company, R.O.B.S Corps. He and another woman trained a couple other people, and then they let him go and the other woman go, and they kept the other two people because they paid him about half. So he's going back to school. He's going to complete a course at Briarcliff. He wants to become a Microsoft administrator, and he should be able to get a good job from that. So
and how old is he?
Hopefully that'll help. 37. He's on his own.
What are the talents or the abilities that he has that you know have pre-existed in the family and in other people? Are there any things
He's got a tremendous personality. He does very well talking to people. He's worked in between for a man that runs the car shows, like the Auto Expo at the Coliseum, and he's running at the Javits Center in New Jersey. And Scott helps talk to the celebrities that are there to sign autographs. Like this last weekend, he worked with and talked with Matt Snell, Emerson Boozer, Roy White, Dave Herman, Bob Nystrom. In fact, someone that had a little booth there offered him a job to work with him part-time. I guess they selling little knickknacks or something at these different car shows. He's got a terrific personality.
You see one another very often?
Yeah, we see him frequently. He comes and does laundry at our house.
When were you born, did you say?
1935.
What are some of those earliest childhood memories that you can share with us?
Well, we were pioneers, in a sense. My grandfather helped found the temple in Babylon before he moved back to Brooklyn. They were originally from Brooklyn. The name Hochheiser actually means high house. And almost every Hochheiser, as far as I know, every Hochheiser is related. They could be traced back to a couple small towns in Austria. It was a very small town, the village of Babylon. So everyone knew everybody. So my father could do little things like, I have a brother 2 years older, Barry. So he got into trouble, and the police let him put my brother in jail. And we kind of wreaked havoc a little in the town. Because we lived next to the movies, and we do little things like, they had red paint, so we painted each other red. They were tarring the roof, opened up the tar machine. The whole yard flooded. And my father never had very much money. And it cost me a pair of shoes because they were never able to take care of the shoes.
Now, you were there all during World War II.
Yes.
Do you have any memories that you can share about?
I can remember an air raid drill. And like 1941, 1942, I was in elementary school. I didn't live maybe a couple blocks away. And really thinking that we were going to be under attack and really scared. My father was in the auxiliary police. In fact, I still have the nightstick he had. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he was very bright.
Did you do you remember the coupons and the rations? And
Yes, I remember all the coupons and how things like meat were very scarce.
gasoline.
Gasoline. Well, that wouldn't have affected me so much as my father.
Tell me a little bit about your mother. Describe your mother, her personality.
My mother was a very bright woman who was kind of frustrated, being a stay-at-home mother. So she got very much involved in Jewish groups like the Sisterhood of the Temple and Hadassah.
What was her maiden name?
Zucker. Her father was very wealthy. He was a tinsmith. He did the acoustics for some of the theaters in New York City. I think he did the acoustics for the originals Ziegfeld Theater. But I didn't like him.
Really?
My brother was the first grandchild, and he'd always give him all kinds of things and might give me a lollipop. And one day he was yelling at my grandmother. I must have been about 2 years old. I ran up and punched him in the stomach. And I don't think he ever liked me. He eventually took off, and no one ever found where he had left his money.
How did you and your wife meet?
I had gone out to California. I was 19. When I came back, I was 23. The rabbi in Babylon, Rabbi Blum, introduced me. In fact, our first date was such a fiasco because apparently she had liked someone else, and I thought that was it. But then I met her. She was going to Brooklyn College. We were unusual. We were taking the train from Babylon to Brooklyn. And we took the train together. And that's how we, started going out, and eventually led to getting married.
I want to take you back for a moment to describe a little bit more about your mother, Marty. What did she enjoy? You said she was active with organizations and the temple.
She enjoyed reading. She enjoyed speaking. In fact, we used to resent it because we always felt that she didn't give us that much time. I mean, I understand now, but she was a very good speaker, and different organizations always wanted to have her come down to do installation of offices and that kind of thing. She was also very much into mahjong, which I never quite understood, except it was like Chinese gin rummy. I figure it was middle-aged Jewish women and Chinese men that played mahjong. I can remember as a kid hearing one crack, two bam. I had no idea what that meant.
Was it just your brother and you then?
And I had a younger brother. He passed away about 7 years ago.
Oh, sorry, what was his name?
Sidney. He was about 4 years younger than myself.
So you were a middle.
Yes.
You were a middle child. Is there anything to the theory that your personality develops around what birth order?
I really don't know. We used to torture my younger brother, though. There was a story that there was a ghost that inhabited the apartment house where we were living, that someone had cheated him out of it. This fellow named Harry Breitbart. You know, we'd hear doors slamming at night, and we hear noises, and no one was ever there. So we wait for my younger brother to be asleep, and we'd go around. It's the ghost of Harry Breitbart. So we really tortured him.
What did your brothers teach you? What did you learn from them when you think back?
Well, my older brother was a real go-getter. He did very well in the insurance field. We used to go around together a lot when we were kids. In fact, we're on the verge of becoming something very unusual, Jewish alcoholics, but it was basically weekend stuff. So we would go to all these bars, and we would go to parties together. So at that time, we were very close. We haven't been as close recently. He's now living in Florida. He's retired down there in Boynton Beach. My younger brother looked up to me a lot.
What was life like then, growing up? It sounds like you had good relationship with both of your brothers.
Yeah.
What was it like to be you as a youngster?
It was interesting. I was always telling jokes. In fact, I had 50th high school reunion over the summer, and I saw notes in my yearbook about forget the puns, and this has carried on because in school when I retired, they said that's one of the things we're not going to miss, those bad jokes.
You carried, in other words, you carried them into the classroom. You carried them.
I'd sit in the back of the room telling jokes, and the teacher would look around like, you know, is my fly open or something.
Who, besides your mother and father then, Marty, were adult influences in your formative years? Were there any other people, either family or friends?
Well, some of the teachers.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any of them by name?
Sure. I had a second grade teacher, Miss Shaw, who was very good. I had Miss Schoonmaker in 5th grade. In fact, I had Mrs. Unger, kindergarten teacher. I can remember picking dandelions and giving her a bouquet of dandelions. In high school, the social studies teachers, history teachers, I had a Ralph Ligori, who was also the cross-country coach, so it was the first time they had had cross-country since the 30s. So I said, gee, I didn't think I could even run. So I went out for the team, and I was like the third person on the team, but we were terrible. In fact, Babylon High School, the colors are orange and black. We had the Long Island meet, and he's looking, and he sees orange and black up toward the front. Only it was Hicksville. And actually, we finished last on Long Island. And the next year, when I wrote up some things for the yearbooks, I wrote up about the cross-country team, and I said, you know, we cross-country team this year finished third 3 times and second twice. I didn't want to say there were only 2 teams and 3 teams in the meet. It sounded better than saying we finished last.
the decision to go into education, was that made early on, or did you arrive at that later? And who might have been the person or people who were influential or instrumental in your making that decision?
Well, one person was my guidance counselor in high school, who was an alcoholic and who really did nothing for anybody. I originally was thinking of going into journalism and drama. Didn't have too much money, so I didn't start college the first year. And then I worked in a luncheonette. That was what you would call in a soda jerk. And I did that for about a year. Then I met a cousin who had gone to Brooklyn College, who was one of the last football heroes there, because Brooklyn College was kind of like my high school Babylon. Those years we were losers when it came to football. And he said, you don't have to live in the city. If you're going in for education, it's tuition free to go to Brooklyn. So I applied. I went to Brooklyn College for a year, taking the train, tuition free. And even though I put down that I was going into teaching, I was still thinking in terms of journalism. Then I was going with some girl, and we kind of broke up. She was only 16. I was 19. So I decided I'll go into the Army. They rejected me. Weak left eye. It was right after the Korean War, so they really didn't need volunteers. If it was a war, I would have been in. And in this luncheonette, some guy was talking to the boss, and I was eavesdropping, as usual. And he was mentioning that he was going out to California. He was going to Berkeley. He was going to go for a master's. He says that he was looking for someone to go with him. At that time, I didn't have a license. I said, gee, if I had a license, I'd go with you. He said, no, just looking for company. So 2 weeks later, I left, went out to California, lived with an aunt for a couple of weeks. That's another story, because we didn't get along too well. So I started, that's where I started getting active in the union. I went out there with $85 in my pocket, not thinking ahead of, long-term plans and everything. I'll get a job. After all, I worked in restaurants. And then I found out that in California, in LA area, they basically only hired women. So there was a Teamster hiring hall right around the corner from this family-type hotel that I was staying at. And they would get call-ins. We need 5 men, we need 10 men. And whoever got there first, so we'd be out there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Police would come by, they'd think we were vagrants or something, but said, no, we're waiting for the hiring hall to open. And I found out that if you were in the Teamsters, or a member of the Teamsters, they took you first, so I joined the Teamsters. So I became a Teamster. And this was delivering new furniture and appliances. And that was very interesting. December of that year, 1954, we heard they were hiring at the Chrysler Corporation material handlers. I said, well, that sounds pretty good, just smooth out material. And I didn't realize it was donkey labor, unloading trucks and freight cars and things like that. So I worked for Chrysler for about 3 years. While I was there, then I became a member of the United Auto Workers. I found so many people hated what they were doing, and they felt trapped. They had families, they had wives, they had kids, and they couldn't just say, well, I have to leave, because they had responsibilities. At that point, I started thinking about maybe going into counseling to help people so they wouldn't fall into that trap. And I kept kind of stalling and everything. And then I had a girlfriend out there who said, is this what you want to do with the rest of your life? Because in those days, every summer they'd have retoolings. So you were laid off for a month or so and collected unemployment. And that's when I learned that the civil servants in the unemployment had no feeling at all for people that were waiting online. You get up to the window around 12, the window would come down, sorry, out to lunch. And then I decided, well, let me go back to school. I had 1 year at Brooklyn College, so I started going at night to Los Angeles City College. And then I decided I was going to come back to New York. That would be easier to go to school, go back, living at home and finish up school. And so I went back to Brooklyn College. And this time I put down education, but this time, at that point, I meant it. You had to teach for 3 years at that time to become a school counselor. So, and I liked history, so I figured, all right, so I had a dual major, and then so I taught for a few years while I worked on getting my master's in guidance, but I was aiming for guidance right along. And eventually, that's what happened. I ended up in Brentwood, and never regretted that. It was a wonderful experience.
I want to take you back to the first time you ever got paid for doing a job. What was your first paying job?
First paying job, in fact, I was always working, is for the local newspaper, the Babylon Leader. In fact, the owner of the Leader was a fellow named James Cooper, who was also a judge and a descendant of James Fenimore Cooper. We got paid $0.25 an hour to put the paper together, and we would also go down to the train station, and we'd sell the Babylon Leader, and I think we kept something like 2 cents a copy. I think it was sold for $0.10, and we got 2 cents a copy. There was another paper in town, the Babylon Eagle, so I started selling that too. In fact, we used to go home for lunch, and the paper came out on one Thursday. I was so busy selling the Babylon Eagle, I forgot to go back to school. That was my first paying job. And then I always was worked in a luncheonette when I was in high school. A job you don't find anymore. I was a pin boy in a bowling alley. So I was always working.
Was there a holiday in the family that was a favorite of yours?
Probably the most important holiday was Passover. In fact, my late grandfather used to have the whole family come in, and it was a very close, wonderful family thing. And as the family got bigger, they were running over 2 nights. My grandfather used to get all the wine for the family. In fact, my father told me at one time, during Prohibition, they made the wine. In fact, he was saying he once had a flat tire. He had a trunk load of wine. And police came over, wanted to know if he needed any help. They said, no, everything's okay. And it was all right.
But your home, your parents' home, was the site of this.
No, my grandfather's.
Was your grandfather?
Then later, after that, we would have it at my father's house.
Mm-hmm. Marty, even now, at this point in your life, are you consider yourself a morning person or a night person? Are you sharper as the day goes on? Or are you bright and ready to grab the day early on in the morning?
Well, I don't know. That's hard to describe.
Okay.
One of the reasons I retired was it was getting too difficult to get up like 5:45 in the morning. But now I get up about 8 in the morning and clean up, and then I go down to South Shore Mall and walk for a couple of miles almost every morning. So
excellent.
I'm alert there.
Do you have favorite aromas that even now, when you get a whiff of a certain aroma, your mind takes you back to a much earlier and a pleasant time of life? They say that sometimes aromas will trigger memories. I'm wondering if you have a favorite.
Not really.
Okay. Walk us through the schools that you attended when you first started school in Babylon, and then you've mentioned the colleges, Brooklyn College and so on, but walk us through right up to the end of your formal education.
Okay. Well, Babylon, it was at that time an elementary and high school was all in one building. The elementary school was on one side and the high school was on the other side. Elementary was all local people from the village, and I have a lot of good memories from that. In fact, at the high school reunion, that kind of brought that back. In the high school, things were kind of spread out so that there was no West Islip High School or North Babylon or Deer Park or West Babylon. So they all came to Babylon High School. So we got to meet kids from all over. Very good experience. In fact, I got involved in plays when I was at Babylon High School, the drama club and the senior play.
Did you do all your all your college work at Brooklyn College then?
And after I graduated,
in California,
right, worked for a year. Then I went to Brooklyn College for a year. Then went out to California, and I picked up 12 credits at night. In fact, I picked up a course in insurance adjusting. I don't even remember how I ended up with that one. And then went back to Brooklyn College, got my master's. The great thing, the first 30 credits of the master's was still tuition free. So that was quite a boon. And later, to get more salary credits and to get more background, I got one of the last of the summer sabbaticals that they had in Brentwood, and I went for 3 summers to C.W. Post in their professional diploma program. I never got the professional diploma because really is not kind of a meaningless diploma, but I got the extra 30 graduate credits. So, and then sculpt courses and things like that. But the last formal was at C.W. Post. Brooklyn was much tougher. When I went to Brooklyn, it was a very highly rated school. The City University was.
Did you have favorite subjects in school, either in high school or when you started taking electives in college? Were there certain courses?
The psychology courses, the guidance courses.
Okay. When did you first come to Brentwood? How did you hear about it? Why Brentwood? That's the issue.
I graduated in February '61. So I went around with my resume all over the place. When I didn't work, I was substituting. So I subbed in Brentwood a few times. I subbed all over. In fact, I had an experience in Farmingdale where I subbed for the chairman of the history department. And unbeknownst to me, the kids sent out a petition that they wanted me. They didn't want the other guy to come back. And then they called me in. They told me what a wonderful teacher was. I said, I have no doubt about that. I said, no, I didn't put the kids up to that. But that kind of put the kibosh on me there. I went on my honeymoon in June of '61. Kept waiting for a telegram because my name was spread around like manure. Anytime I didn't work, I mean, I was all over the place, including Brentwood. I had an interview with Lenny Sachs and John Maroka. And in fact, Lenny Sachs bought me lunch. And that's the first time I found out American chop suey was noodles and ground beef. I must have made a good impression. Came September, I still didn't have a full-time job. I was subbing here and there. I got called into Brentwood because John Maroka had had a heart attack.
By the way, do you remember any of the questions that were asked you during that interview?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Continue.
And it was kind of an awkward situation because if I basically what happened was Bill Lapp, who later became principal of West Junior High, had taught social studies. They made him acting assistant principal, and Stan Yankowski became acting principal. If John came back too soon, I was going to be out of a job. So I would see him, he'd come back. I said, "Oh, how are you, Mr. Morocco? You don't want to rush this." And come February, Charlie Swenson, the curriculum coordinator at that time, petitioned the board to add another social studies position. So I started about the second week of September 1961, and then I left July of 2002.
What were some of the first impressions that you had once you became an employee of Brentwood School District?
Well, one of the first things is I was concerned I was going to be too soft. So I came in just the opposite. And then I had a class, and I closed the door. I said, "Look, this is just between us. This isn't working. What's happening that you don't want to pay attention, you don't want to listen?" And they taught me. They said, "You scared us. You came in like a tiger." As one kid said, "You give too much homework." And I said, "No, I don't think so." But it opened my eyes, and then things really took off from there. And I got involved with teacher Bob Rosenblatt, who I think of as Mr. Chips. And Bill Lapp had been appointed to be a student council advisor along with Bob Rosenblatt. So I also became student council advisor. And he was a very good influence. So I started getting involved right away in extracurricular things, and also working with the community. From the very first year, we adopted needy families at the holiday time. Initially, all the different organizations in Brentwood met at the administration building, and each group picked a few names. So we would always adopt like 2 or 3 families, and basically bought everything. And then somewhat after that, we started having a food drive. Eventually, we were up to adopting about 25 families with huge food drives. I can remember the late Ray Perez. What a great guy. He and I used to deliver it. We'd load up his van, and we'd go around to like 25 houses, almost all senior citizens. It was, very, very moving.
It sounds like you were off to a smashing start, that you loved it.
Yes.
Sounds like you loved it.
I did. I loved what I was doing right away. And I was, taking courses to go into counseling, because I wanted to work with the kids on the one-on-one. It changed from older people, like feeling trapped, to working with kids and helping them work toward their futures. And at that age, there's always so many problems, and so that's always been meaningful.
Talk a little bit about the positions that you actually did hold in the classes, or the grade levels you taught, or the
for the most
various changes that took place.
For the most part, I taught 9th grade social, and pretty much developed it, because it had been geography. In fact, I called it cultural anthropology, where we would study different areas of the world, different religions, the effect of geography, the whole cultural approach. I did that for about 6 years, and then went into becoming a counselor.
And where was your first appointment as a counselor?
Basically, I pretty much never left North.
I see.
When the 7th grade center opened, I followed I picked up the 7th grade over there for 1 year, and then came back. So I really consider it the whole time at North. So I've had second generation. In fact, I was jokingly saying it was time to leave when I had the first grandchild.
Who did you work with? Mention some of the names of people that you spent a lot of time with over the years, either from the beginning or that you worked not along with, but you worked for some of the.
Well, I worked very much along with Bob Rosenblatt, John Maroka, until he left and unfortunately died fairly young. Bill Kurlick I worked with for many years, Joe Communal, Ed Polofchek, and generally got along pretty well. The only one I didn't was back in the early years when I was in the classroom. There was an assistant principal called Ed Harmon, who was a ventriloquist. He'd call the kids in, he'd have the dummy talking to them. But I had left my class for a moment to run downstairs to get some paper or something. I asked someone to watch it. And I see one of my students on the telephone. I said, what do you belong in my class? And the kid, that's okay. I said, no, it's not okay. I got permission. You didn't get my permission. Hang up. And the kid ignored me. So I was young and stronger those days. So I hung up. I ripped him out of the phone booth because they still had a phone booth. And I brought him into the office. And then later I sat down with the kid and with Ed Harmon. And in front of the kid, Ed Harmon said, you shouldn't have done that. And I felt something sticking between my shoulder blades. But for the most part, got along pretty well with the administrators.
Do you think that the training that you got in preparation for teaching adequately prepared you for what you found when you got into the actual?
Well, of course it changed, particularly in the classroom. The other life experience helped me, I think, to become a better counselor. And teaching first, I think it's still a good idea because then I have a sense of what a teacher is going through in the classroom. I think that's very important.
Marty, I think you've already answered this, but I'm going to ask it and give you a chance to put it together yourself. Other than the job description, which you were holding at any one time, how did you, throughout, define your own purpose for being and doing what you were doing?
My own purpose was to get as much out of the kids as possible, to teach them, particularly when I was teaching social studies, to teach them that they were important, to find something where they could feel success, and as a counselor, to see themselves as something where they're important and their goals are important. I can remember fighting with girls when I first started counseling, where they said, well, it's important for my brother to go to college, but, not for me. And I say, wait a minute, that you are important, and try to get them to see that that what they do is important.
Now, I know from our personal contact that you've been very active with BTA for many years. You were active in the organization and the union. But I don't know, I don't have a clue as to the many different ways that you were active. So I'm just going to give you full reign. Talk about your BTA affiliation, how you got started, what you did, how it evolved, and where you are now, because you're still connected.
Right. I first started my second year.
Even before you were tenured?
Yes. We didn't worry about tenure then. In fact, from North Junior, we were kind of like the Young Turks, where we were going against the tide a lot of times. So over the years, been involved, aside from being a delegate, chief delegate. I was on the negotiating committee one year. I was on the grievance committee. I was in charge of the professional council, the extracurricular committee. But I've always been committed to the union.
You were a delegate.
I was a delegate, chief delegate, almost every year.
What are some of the biggest situations, I'll call them, that you remember being involved with?
Well, I can remember when we were treated really with disdain by the Board of Education. They had a salary committee. I wasn't on it, but they would say, all right, we'll meet with you. And they'd be waiting. And then 10 o'clock, they'd say, okay, we'll meet with you now. Then they'd go over. There'd be a sign at the door. Sorry, we waited. It was really confrontational. So I remember the one year they offered us $100 across the board raise. They used to have the budget vote and the hearing the same night. And essentially what would happen is by 2 o'clock in the morning, the only people left were people from the fire department, and they really decided what the budget was going to be every year. So we got a phone bank at Marion Gray's house. All the teachers gave lists of parents that they had been working with that they felt was sympathetic. And we called, and we got a lot of parents to come out. And we packed the budget hearing. How confrontational it was is Charlie Gray was the union president. We had, I forget the person's name, elected to chair the meeting. Unfortunately, we picked the wrong guy because he didn't know how to run a meeting. But he said, Charlie Gray wanted to speak. So this guy said, well, we certainly would like the union president to speak unless there are any objections. Any of you have any objections? And there were some of these, people in the audience go, yeah, we don't want him to speak. And we were sitting in the back, those of us that were not residents of Brentwood. Then they took a vote to ask all the people that were not residents to leave. And we were ready to go to court, get an injunction on the meeting, but that vote failed. And people bad-mouthing. And I can remember Dave Martys leaning forward to a parent saying, that's okay, we will still teach your child. So then they had a vote, and they voted to give us $200 instead of $100. And then a lot of people left. Later on, someone said, I want to know the exact vote. They hadn't compiled the vote. It was so overwhelming. They were ready to throw it out. They had another vote, and it still passed. So we got 200. It wasn't until the Taylor law, when they said they had to negotiate, that we finally got it.
Now, for many years, that was an automatic raise, $200 a year. There was no negotiation. It was just
right. Not until the Taylor law.
And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
Do you remember the near strike?
Yes, I was on the negotiating committee that year. They hired a lawyer, I forget the guy's name, to negotiate for the district. We made an offer. They didn't have any kind of counter offer. What they did was they went through the contract. They were going line by line. So, for example, one of the items I remember, it says the use of listening devices shall be prohibited. We discussed what a listening device is for about an hour or so. And then the district's negotiating committee decided to caucus, so they caucused for 2 hours. And this basically was going on and on and on. And in fact, we were ready to go on strike Labor Day. I wasn't even there. I was at a wedding. And at some point, Guy said enough of this. And Guy knew, because Guy pretty much wrote the first contract. And then he and Jack Zuckerman and Harold Schwinger, who was the chief negotiator, sat down and worked out the contract. And it moved from there, and it stayed that way ever since.
But we were were just about ready to begin. We were picketing, but
Yes.
we were ready to walk out. And I think that there was a vote held. Where was it? Up at the Colony Hill?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Right. But that was as close as Brentwood ever came.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the relationship has been extremely positive.
Oh, absolutely. Since Felicio came in. So aside from those really negative people at that one point where they had 3 of them on the board, it's been where we're working together, and it's really a pattern that other districts could follow.
Is it true that it is in great measure the genius of that contract that Guy was responsible for getting out, that provided a system by looking at neighboring school
Yes.
districts, that it took the argument and the confrontation out of the struggle?
Yes, and plus people on the board that didn't see themselves as confrontational, that saw that we are working together for the same goal, the best education, for the kids in Brentwood.
That brings me, I have to ask this question. You're a union person from way back then.
Yes.
Even before you came to teaching.
Right.
Has your definition of unionism changed over the years? Or has the role of union changed? Or is it still ultimately the same?
Well, I think with teachers, it's become very positive and very strong. We're probably one of the strongest unions in the state. The other unions I belonged to had other things going, like the Teamsters. We'd have a Teamsters meeting, and one of the Teamsters had just gotten out of jail, and they took a vote that they should give him money to go on a vacation. Is there, like getting $5 from every member? And, does anyone object to that? You didn't dare object to that. Or the UAW, where they would have a walkout. Sometimes Chrysler would foment it. They wanted to cut back on production or something. So they would fire the head of the union committee, and you'd come in. I worked a night shift, and they said, "You bring your lunch?" Yeah. I said, "Well, take it with you because we're all walking out." And it wasn't a surprise because the whole front end of the place was cleared out of cars, so people would walk by and use quarters or something to scratch the cars. The teachers, the union is much stronger, and I don't always agree with everything they do on the state level.
Do you remember the early objections, Marty, to becoming unionized? When the union first came into Brentwood, there were objections.
Oh, yes, I remember that very well.
For the very reasons that you're discussing.
Right. Where they felt that
this is
there was
collar,
and there was a stigma. We're professionals, and in fact, I can remember even things like now there's an honorarium, which it should be. When they first mentioned it, people like Sam Weitzman, who was an old union guy, who said, "Hey, then I won't get involved. I'm walking out." And I can remember one of the first strong union people who was in the AFT before NYSET came in, Hi Harris. What a dedicated union person he was. In fact, I was at the meeting. You can almost say he gave his life for the union, where he had a cerebral hemorrhage in the middle of a House of Delegates meeting. We didn't know what it was. They thought he was snoring. And it turned out, that it had a cerebral hemorrhage. And, he was one of the first ones to really push the union in Brentwood.
You've mentioned a lot of names, and you've mentioned them in very positive ways. Is there anyone that you haven't mentioned so far that whose name should be mentioned here in terms of their impact, either as a role model, as a leader,
We've had a lot of good leaders. Dave Motts, Nick Siciliano, Bob Farina, the Zuckermans, Les Black, Joe Hogan. We've had a lot of good leaders.
And everybody had something else, something different to bring.
Yeah.
To the overall mission. What about the lovable characters that you remember too? You must have some of those. I've made that euphemism to describe an umbrella that might give you an opportunity to talk about some people that you've worked with over the years that made a mark on your memory. Are there people who come to mind?
Well, it was a fellow named Dave Feidelson, who really didn't belong in teaching, but he was, a couple of women were in the ladies' room, and they look down and they see these big pair of men's shoes. And they're talking about childbirth or something, and he said, "Hello, ladies." He walks out. He said he took a wrong turn from a faculty meeting. And then, it's like Bob Tagner, who was a legend, very funny. He was a phys ed teacher. And kid says, "Well, if I climb the rope and get to the top, what if I lose my grip? What should I do?" And he says, "Just flap your arms and scream." Or Phil Teich, not Phil, Phil Teche was very active, and he was always good with the kids. And Phil Greif, who used to, he was tough in the classroom, but he would take kids fishing, and he'd say, "Summertime when the weather is hot, you're in school and your friends are not," for the kids that were failing.
Marty, you've been very helpful to the organization, the Brentwood Teachers Organization. Was there ever a time when you needed and got help from the organization?
Well, I got the summer sabbatical.
Okay, all right. Of course, I want to throw something in, and that is the way in which our insurance, which of course our union has negotiated for us, has provided us a very, very nice blanket of coverage. And
Yes.
That's one thing that we all
Right.
received from. What was the date of your retirement?
July 1st, 2002.
Okay, and why that year? I know we've talked for a couple of years that you were getting ready, that you weren't quite ready yet, and it was coming, but ultimately you made the decision. What led up to that?
Well, I said at some point I'm going to have to go. It's going to be difficult at any point. All right. Getting tough to get up in the morning. I mean, I still felt very good working with the kids. There still was very rarely a day that ever went by that I didn't feel, "Gee, I'm glad I was here today." And and I missed that, and it was hard, but reached the point I say, "Well, that's it." I mean, actually, I was losing money working.
Was there one? If you look back, is there one thing throughout your entire professional career or your accomplishments that gives you the most sense of pride or sense of accomplishment? That's a hard thing to ask you to do, to single out one thing. I'm just wondering if something pops to mind when I ask that question.
There's several things. One is when you don't get a lot of feedback from kids when you're at the junior high level. But when I started getting the parents, and they were telling me, you help my child and help me, and you may not remember this, but you told me that to try nursing, that might be good, and I did, and I became a nurse, and it was thanks to your influence. That and reaching out to the community. The food drives, I finally had to give it up. It was getting to be a little too much. But that annual food drive, we helped a lot of families. That, and also started a senior citizen concert in the spring that we've had now. I guess they're about 15 years.
How many years were you in the classroom? How many years in service?
6 years in the class, and classroom, and 35 in counseling.
So a total of 41 years?
Yeah.
Wow. And do you remember what your beginning salary was before taxes?
Yeah, $5,000. That was my first contract. The contract was actually $2,500 because I was per diem until February 2nd of 1962, and then it was $2,500.
Any other part-time jobs during those many years? Other things you did to supplement? Did you ever do summer school, evening school?
I worked in camps for many years.
You did. Because it's kind of hard to make ends meet, taking home less than $100 a week, even in those days.
Yeah, and my wife didn't work.
And your wife didn't work.
I taught a little bit. Wasn't a great experience in a Hebrew school teaching history, and it was a course that the kids had to take until they had their bar mitzvah, and then they left. And for most part we really didn't care what happened in the class. But I worked many summers in camps.
Now, what have you been doing since the date of your retirement? I suspect that you got some sleep, first of all.
Yeah. I get up every morning, and I go down to South Shore Mall, and 5-6 days a week I walk a couple miles at the mall. I get active in the retiree chapter, both the RC21 and the R.O.B.S. I'm taking bridge lessons and playing bridge a couple days a week. And then I have one more component that I haven't filled in yet, that I'm thinking of working with hospice, with bereavement groups. I had run bereavement groups as part of my counseling job.
If you were to single out one or several of the most important books that you've ever read, could you do that?
Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I was about 10 years old when the newsreels first started coming in about the concentration camps being opened up. And I had read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. In fact, while I was teaching social studies, every year just before the winter holidays, I would read sections to the class so that, hopefully the idea of, never again.
Right. Is there anything that you would have done differently when you look back over the 40 plus years, but that you look now and say, if I had only done this instead of that? Or do you look back with a degree of satisfaction saying,
well, I look back with a degree of satisfaction. I think I would have gotten involved in theater a little more. I had done some regional theater. I was about 50. I was in a few plays at this Author's Playhouse that's now in Bayshore, where an optometrist has written, must have written 100 plays. And I enjoyed that a lot. I would have done more of that.
I know you didn't enjoy getting up at 6 o'clock. What other things did you not enjoy about the active part of your service?
In the beginning of the year, we're really not talking to kids, with paperwork and making out schedules and that kind of thing. But what I did enjoy, I didn't mention, there were a few things that would come up to get kids involved. So over the years with programs at Stony Brook for the summer to get kids involved. Presidential Award, that Outstanding Youth Award from Islip Town. And in fact, one of the things I feel really good about is the Islip Bulletin. For about 3 years, 4 years, I kept trying to get Brentwood Middle School, North Middle School, recognized for their annual Inspiration Award. And a couple times they gave us honorable mention. And then I wrote again, I said, what do we have to do? I mentioned it between the food drives and the senior citizen concert. At one point we had kids who were helping seniors with shoveling snow and raking leaves. And I prevailed. And one year they did give us that recognition of an annual Inspiration Award for the school. I've always tried to promote Brentwood. There's so many people that don't know.
Do you know, one of the things that I've liked to ask people because of the different responses is that Brentwood is often referred to as a microcosm of the whole country. Did you see it that way, or did you see it in a different way? I mean, they say what happens in Brentwood generally happens here first, and then it happens everywhere else. And the kind of cooperation and the kind of connectiveness between various groups that is happening all over this country certainly happened in Brentwood.
Yeah. Very cosmopolitan population. The kids in Brentwood really have had an advantage in working with all kinds of people from all kinds of racial, ethnic, social backgrounds. I think that's been very, very important. Biggest problem I've seen is there's too much transiency. There's too much moving around, so that it's very difficult to help kids if they keep moving.
Is there something that you would like to have seen accomplished while you were standing your watch that you were not either singularly or collectively able to see happen?
I don't know. I can't think of anything.
Okay. What about the current so-called threats to public education, like magnet schools and various other privatizations? And do you think public education is going to do okay for the next 30 years?
I think public education is going to do okay. There's always been different threats, and people don't understand what tenure is, and they think it's a lifetime guarantee, and they're finding that the charter schools and the magnet schools aren't working. The schools are not a business. What I would like to see is the state, the people that are coming down with mandates and edicts, to understand what really goes on in a classroom, so that when you have a poor population and many where English is a second language, and with the transiency that they don't point a finger and say this school is failing.
Marty, I'd like to see your words and the words of many of our colleagues shared with new teachers, people just coming in,
yes,
new counselors. And so in that spirit, what would you say to a beginning counselor or a beginning teacher based on the experiences that you've had in Brentwood and elsewhere? What kind of advice could you offer?
Be involved. Show your interest. If you make mistakes, learn from them. I still made mistakes in my 41st year, but it's what you do with them that's very important. Like I say, I started with the mistake of being too tough, and learn from that. And that's the most important thing, to learn from the mistakes that you make.
I don't know what we've left out. I'm sure we've left out things. If you can think through the questions that we fielded and you responded to, is there something that we didn't talk about that we don't want to ignore while we're still have the opportunity to do this?
I think we've probably pretty much hit everything. I'll probably think of something later.
We both will.
Yeah.
We both will. But I want to end by thanking you for being with us. And I hope it hasn't been all that painful to participate.
Not at all.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
You're welcome.